All right, here we go, geometry. So we are leading up to our Chapter 2 test. It's not this week, but next week. But at the end of this week, we're going to get our review. So what I want us to do is work on using our definitions and postulates in the same situations. Okay, so again, these are just, you might be using a definition as your reason, you might be using a postulate as your reason. It just kind of depends on the problem, okay? So for number 2, again, just kind of got to read carefully and maybe label your picture. So in this case, it says BH is congruent to BG. And then it also says GE is congruent to HF. Okay, so as I've kind of said before, when you have two separate things going on, it's probably going to be either addition, subtraction, or, it kind of depends. But usually in this case, it's either addition or subtraction. So in this case, look at what we have here. These two, when you put them together, are going to give you a segment. These two, when you put them together, are going to give you a segment. Okay? So in this case, for number 2, I'm going to have the whole thing equals the whole thing. So a part plus the part equals the whole. So in this case, BF is the whole thing on the left. BE is the whole thing on the right. And what we did was we added. So segment, add postulate. Okay. Now, I just want to keep in mind, number 1, I didn't want to do because I need you to know what that upside down T is. Okay. If you don't know what that is, we're going to talk about it extensively on Monday or Tuesday. Okay. So next one, G is the midpoint of BE. So keep in mind, if it says something about a midpoint, guess what definition I'm going to use for my reason? Definition of midpoint. Okay? Can't stress that enough. If it says the given is a midpoint, I'm going to use the definition of a midpoint to say whatever I want to say. So what does a midpoint do? It splits something into two congruent parts. Okay, so we got to figure out what those two parts are. So G is the midpoint of BE. So if G is the midpoint of BE, that means this part is congruent to this part. So I just got to say what those are. BG is congruent to GE. Definition of midpoint. That simple. Okay. So number 4, it's bisect and bisect. Two things are congruent. So we've kind of said in the past couple weeks, or couple days, that if you have two things being bisected, again, bisected means it's going to be cut in half. Something's going to be cut in half. Okay, so that's going to be the halves postulate. Okay, but again, you got to figure out what is that part. What is being cut in half? So in this case, it's ADE and BCE. So let's find those. ADE is all that, and then BCE is all of that. So I've got those two angles congruent, and since they're bisected, okay, they're cut in half, then I have two parts that are congruent now. So on this one, I have 7 and 8. On this one, I have 9 and 10. So the halves postulate says one of these parts is congruent to one of these parts by the halves postulate. So I'm just going to say angle 7 is congruent to angle 9. I could have done angle 7 to 10. I could have done 8 to 9. I could have done 8 to 10. Any of those. Okay? So the next one, number 5, says AH congruent to GC. Okay, and it looks like it's getting a little busy, so I'm going to go ahead and go to our second picture. AH, GC. So AH is this one right here, and GC. Okay, and that's our only given. But if you notice, they're part of the same line, and what we have is a good old gap in the middle. Okay, so if you have a gap in the middle, remember we can add it to those. Okay, you can add it to that, you can add it to that. But before we do that, we got to make sure we know that we have that gap in our conclusion and reason. So if you have a gap, reflexive property, HG congruent to HG by reflexive. Now I can go ahead and add that gap to each. So AG now is congruent to CH. AG, CH. And since I added that to it, it's segment add, or segment addition postulate. All right. So, last couple examples that we'll look at today. AE and BE, FE and GE. So AE is right here, congruent to BE. Okay. And then it also says what? FE and GE. So FE, GE. So in this case, I have the whole thing and a part of the whole thing. So anytime I've got the whole and the whole, the part and the part, I can take that part away to get the other part. So if I take these two away, look to what parts I have, BG and AF. Okay, and that's subtraction postulate. I've got a whole minus the part to get whatever part's left. So in that case, like I said, BG and AF. So AF congruent to BG. And that is by segment subtraction postulate that time. Okay. So the last one is, it should be one of the easiest ones, but we got to know what our definitions are. If it says a measure of an angle is equal to 180, what's the only type of angle that's equal to 180? I don't even have to look at my picture here. Okay, what's equal to 180? And that would be a straight angle. So that's what you say. Angle DEC is a straight angle. And then definition of, guess what? Straight angle. Okay? And you can abbreviate however, but that's it. That's all you have to do on that. Okay? So, there's some other ones that we'll talk about, but for the most part, again, it's just making sure we're paying attention to what's the angles we're given. Do we have a whole thing or a part of two different things, or is there an overlap or a gap, or is it just any run-of-the-mill definition? Okay? So try your best on the rest of those, and then we'll talk about those in class and get ready for our test next week. Peace.